All right, so all systems go here. We are live. Welcome back to the 2026 season of the Strategic Farming Let's Talk Crop series. I believe this is the third session in our series, and it just happens that today's episode co-aligned with the annual Minnesota Ag Expo here in Mankato. And so we're coming to you live from the trade show floor at the Ag Expo at the Maverick Ice Arena here. So actually nice and warm in here this morning. And we got a number of people we're going to hopefully talk to today. Do want to give thanks here. This program is brought to you by University of Minnesota Extension, as well as generous support from the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, as well as the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council. And this is kind of their flagship annual event where they carry out a lot of their business, as well as have educational speakers and seminars, and it's also has a big trade show. So it's a really pretty good opportunity for folks to get out and learn a little bit about their organization and perhaps participate in some of those leadership type activities. So with that, I'm Ryan Miller. I'm going to be kind of handling the some of the technical stuff here at our desk at our trade show booth. If you're out here at the expo or headed down, stop in the next hour and say hi. We are here. But we've also got a couple of my coworkers here today that are going to help wrangle in guests, as well as facilitate some of the speaking and discussion here. And so we're going to send the spotlight over there to Dave Nicolai, my counterpart, kind of in the central part of the state. And he's going to introduce our first guest, and they're going to have a little discussion about some of the soybean work being done in the state.
Yeah, Dave Nicolai, thank you very much, Ryan Miller. We're here on the trade show floor with Bob Lindeman. Bob is Minnesota Soybean Growers. He's from McLeod County near the Brownton area. And Bob, you have a special assignment in terms of what your involvement, and that is on the research committee. Tell us a little bit about what the research committee does and what their goal here is with the Minnesota soybean growers.
So I'm on the grower side of the MSGA, but I'm also serving on the research committee. And I enjoy working with research. We've been going through like 32 projects now this year, and it gets to be a lot of work deciding how to spend money and to do it properly for the farmers around the state.
Can you give us an example of maybe a couple of the research projects that are of a lot of interest, maybe in terms of inputs and some practicality in the nearby future here that your organization is looking at or hoping to fund?
Well, so we've always got some of our main ones are always breeding. We've got breeding through the University of Minnesota, and that's very important. And then you start talking about diseases. Bugs. So there's different areas. We look into each area, a little differently. One of the main focuses now this year is red crown rot, which was just spotted in southwestern Minnesota this year for the first time. And, it hadn't been close to Minnesota as far as I know up until this point.
So red crown rot, like you say, is a new disease. Will this be a situation where you're looking at going with more recognition, scouting, working with plant pathology, probably Dr. Dean Melvick on University of Minnesota St. Paul campus and other people?
It sure is. I believe there's a project turned in by Dean Melvick, and I would say, we haven't funded these projects yet, but I'm guessing that might be at the top of our priority list, just because it is a new disease and it can really wipe out a lot of yield.
All right, very good. Anything else that you'd like to tell us about the committee? Are you active all year long, or do you have special times of the year that you're involved in reviewing these projects and making monetary awards, etc.?
So the projects, I believe they're sent out to the universities, different researchers. We do third-party researchers. It's not all just university, but our main work starts in January when we receive all the research proposals, and then we start sorting through them. I mean, they can be anywhere from 8 pages to 20 pages. So you're going through 32 projects with 20 pages it takes a little time.
Tell us a little bit about the funding in terms of where the dollars come from here, checkoff. How's that all arranged?
Yeah, funding comes through checkoff. We're allowed a certain amount of dollars each year. This year, I believe it's going to be just a little over $1 million. that were allowed. It comes down to the point where when years are a little tougher, we can't fund every project, not even close. So we really have to go through it with a fine tooth comb and pick out the projects that we think are going to serve, Minnesota well.
Well, thank you, Bob. Anything else you'd like to add about your committee or about being on the board? Have you enjoyed your time and continue with it?
I've enjoyed my time on the board. So the growers part of the board does more advocacy things, with our legislature. But I was chosen to go on this research committee through the checkoff side. And I enjoy that. I really do. I also serve on the NCSRP committee, which is a group of 14 states that get together and choose the research projects, kind of between what USB would do and the state of Minnesota would do. It's projects that collaborate with more states, that committee. And I also serve on the AFREC committee as well, which would be through the Minnesota Department of Ag.
You're more than busy all the time between that and farming and everything else. Well, thank you, Bob, for stopping by. We do appreciate that.
All right.
And you'll be around here in the floor. We look like the crowd is starting to thicken up here a little bit, so we have a good opportunity. I believe
All
we
Thank you.
We appreciate
All right,
that.
thanks, Bob and Dave. And now I think we have some people in the queue here from our 4-H side of the organization, and they're going to have an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the program that they're representing here today.
Okay, we have an opportunity. We've been involved in a University of Minnesota extension with obviously an outreach program for youth in terms of 4-H and development. And the last several years have had a lot of emphasis in the crops area. We have folks that are involved in their 4-H and youth leadership that are involved with some of the areas having to do with their opportunity to provide as an ambassador for agriculture and science. And a special guest here, Lucas, but I think you go by Luke. All right. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us where you're from, where you're at in school, and why you are here today and what your interest is in crop science.
Well, hello. My name is Lucas DePlazas. I'm from Dakota County. I am currently a junior at Farmington High School. I'm here as a state ag ambassador. I love crop science. I have been doing the crop scouting contest for many years now. I believe I'm going on my 4th or 5th year competing in it. So I have always been interested in the different crops, and I love seeing all the different plants.
Very good. So, and you participated before. Now, how many coworkers are of yours in terms of ambassadors are here with us today at Mankato?
So there's 5 of us here today out of the 27 of the ag ambassadors.
Very good. And what other activities do you do during the year besides obviously come to a trade show or an educational event such as this?
So one of my personal favorite other activities that we do is go to classrooms and teach from kids all the way from like kindergarten to 8th grade. So we'll hit a lot of classrooms. I believe we hit around 2,000 kids last year and kind of taught them a bit about animals and wheat. We also go to trade shows, and then we go to different like partners. We've done stuff with Farm Bureau and other organizations.
And then how long is your term as an ambassador?
So we'll be a state ambassador for 1 year. You can start once you hit your sophomore year in high school, and then you can go all the way through 1 year past high school.
So this position that you applied for, did you have to give a speech or fill out a lot of paperwork, interview and so forth? But how did you get to where you are?
So there was an process with giving your resume, giving kind of some short answers and an essay question. I did that last year. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of things I kind of had known about myself, and then some things I had to kind of think deeper on. And then this year, as a returning ag ambassador, it was a little bit different with some different questions asking you what you want to bring back into it or what you want to further in. So a lot of different activities, and then some leadership things that we went through for some training and all of that.
So what have you learned so far since you've been here? Now, were you here yesterday?
I was not.
Okay. So what do you hope to learn here at the trade show in terms of that? And then what else are you doing in terms of an outreach situation?
So I hope to meet some new people today, talk to some new faces, kind of get 4-H involved and show that everyone has a place in it.
Very good. Very good. and I think we'll have a chance maybe to visit with some of your other folks here as well. I think we have one other person at least to come on up here. All right. I'll stop back here a little bit, a little closer in here into the camera in there. And Brian, you can help me. You can adjust things here. Greta and Abby, you want to talk a little bit about where you're from and why you're here today and what you hope to learn?
So I'm from Olmsted County by our fairgrounds. We have a big corn tower. I'm here today to just kind of see what's going on in the Ag Expo and represent our Ag Ambassador team and 4-H as a whole. So we do a lot with getting youth and adults, really anyone who wants to, involved in giving back to the community. And a lot of what we do as Ag Ambassadors is specifically about talking about agriculture within our community and the different facets of that.
Very good. And Abby?
I would say I'm personally here to learn. I'm from Dakota County. Sorry, should have led with that. We have a big rabbit project at our county. And I don't know what I'm here to learn. I'm just here to learn.
Okay, good opportunity. A lot of businesses and agribusiness, plus educational government organizations around here, and other talks and things as well. Thank you, Abby, for stopping by. We appreciate that. Who do we have next? Anybody else? We have an opportunity here. How about the weather that's going on here in situations? Young man, you want to step over here? I think people have seen you before. Tell us again your name and what is it that you actually do for a living?
Well, my name's Dan Lemke. I'm ag weather specialist for the Linder Farm Network. I do the weather daily. Also do some reporting from events like this Minnesota Ag Expo. Some writing for ag publications as well.
So I had a chance to visit with you a little bit before we started, and I wanted you to check your sources, and I think you did. Tell us a little bit about the weather, and I think it's going to get cold the end of this week. So give us the lowdown on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've gotten some snow yesterday. Probably a little more snow today. Might be a little breezy. So folks who are heading home perhaps from this Minnesota Ag Expo will potentially run into some travel conditions. And then following behind that is going to be some very cold air. Not quite so bad tomorrow, but by Friday and Saturday, high temperatures not likely to get above zero. Could be looking at overnight lows in the teens and 20s below zero. Also some gusty winds giving us some nasty wind chills out there. So this actually is typically the coldest stretch of the year, and it's certainly going to live up to its billing.
So I want your guarantee, Dan, that this is going to be it for the cold weather in the month of February is going to be warmer. What is the outlook? And you've seen some of these models for into the month of February.
It does look like a little bit warmer potentially for the first part of February, but beyond that, I mean, I'm a firm believer that you get beyond, a week to 10 days, and it's pretty hard to really accurately forecast things. So a little bit warmer for the first part of February, but a lot of winter months yet. I mean, we all know, most of us who have been around Minnesota long enough know that until we get through the month of March and even the first part of April, winter can reappear anytime it really feels the need, I guess.
Well, certainly we're going to rely upon you to give us that daily forecast and arise there at that 6 o'clock hour, and then come back at 12:30 and correct it if it's wrong, and update it as needed. So good opportunity. Well, if you were with us for the rest of the winter, and if you haven't escaped to Florida, but I think you're escaping maybe to Norway later on this summer, but by that time I think the snow will melt.
Well, it's certainly hopeful that it will be, because that will be in August, and if we have snow in August, I think we're all kind of going to be confused about what's going on in our world if there's snow in Minnesota in August.
Well, very good, very good. Thank you very much. Anything else, Dan? But that's about all we had here. So we're going to switch it back, and we have a couple other guests that are going to. We have a representative from the Southern Research and Outreach Center at Waseca, Mr. Jeff Vetch. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about what your position is at Waseca and what you do and when you do it?
Morning, Dave. So I've been a researcher, was hired as a support scientist, but been leading the research program in soil fertility and nutrient management at the Southern Research and Outreach Center now for, I guess this is my 34th year. Seen a lot of interesting projects that we've collaborated with a lot of our state specialists, Still enjoy that and working with their grad students. Focus my research on nitrogen management, but dabble in sulfur and phosphorus and potassium as well.
Now, recently, we've had an opportunity for an educational session at Waseca for both growers and ag professionals and Minnesota soybean growers. We're supportive of that financially for a lot of the growers and farmers that came in. But you gave a talk. Okay, can you summarize that a little bit? What are some of the high points and so forth of messages that you allowed people to hear from yourself at Waseca here recently in terms of primarily here we're talking about last year's research and prior to that?
Yeah, so I focused on 3 studies, 2 that I've been working on or collaborating with Fabian Fernandez, our state nitrogen management specialist. One of those is the long-term nitrogen study that is funded by AFREC, or the fertilizer checkoff, where we're looking at nitrogen management across 6 locations in the state of Minnesota, recognizing that we have very different soils, from the glacial tills in south central and western Minnesota to the coarse textured irrigated sands at Becker and the loess soils in southeast Minnesota and the valley at Crookston. So I talked a little bit about some of the recent results from that study. What we see is south central Minnesota seems to need more nitrogen than we do in southeast and in southwest, and that is not that unusual. But at the same time, trying to identify the soil physical and chemical properties that result or help explain why those needs are different. The other study that we talked about, or the other 2 studies that we talked about, one was a study that's funded by the corn growers, and they also help support our Winter Crops Day and that Ag Professional Research Update. And that was a study that Fabian started a few years ago, looking at the differences between anhydrous and urea in the spring. And we know that some people, I don't want to use anhydrous in the spring, but we know that anhydrous is probably our most stable nitrogen source. And especially in the southern third or quarter of the state, those are the counties that are really seeing the more increased rainfall over the last 30 to 50 years, especially in the spring. And that increased spring rainfall is what drives nitrogen loss. And so when we look at that project over the last 2 years, 3 of the 4 sites at Waseca, 2 of the 3 sites at Waseca, anhydrous in the spring was superior to urea. And that's just because it sticks around better in those wet springs, and the last 2 springs have been wet. In that study, we're also looking at a whole plethora of things in the fall, or nitrogen management sources, combinations, placements. And that's a little bit more complicated situation. We're also doing that study at Lamberton, where it's a glacial till soil, but it's also a little bit drier. And urea and anhydrous have kind of performed better there, more consistent. The last study that I talked about was our drainage study, which currently we are looking at the difference between a corn for grain cropping system and a corn for silage, and whether a cover crop is a good idea following corn silage to help mitigate nitrogen loss in tile drainage. And what we found in the 4 years that that's been going on, funded by the AFREC, is that yes, a cereal rye cover crop has been fairly effective 3 out of the 4 years at reducing the nitrogen losses in tile drainage, and really has had no impact on silage corn production the subsequent year after. And the other thing that's been very fascinating in that study is we found that we generally need less nitrogen. About 180 pounds was more than adequate for corn grown for silage, where we had corn grown for grain on the exact same site, we needed about 40, and in some cases even slightly more pounds of nitrogen than that to optimize production.
Well, one of the concerns people have is economics right now in terms of inputs and so forth. So kind of to close off this part of the interview, what recommendations do you have for growers if perhaps they haven't applied their nitrogen already, or maybe they're still in the southeast part of the state or other areas? What are some tools, some things to keep in mind to finalize those so you're the most economical in terms of the input in terms of this 2026 season?
Yeah, well, I think in our area here in South Central and probably in Southwest, the fall conditions were ideal. So I think a lot of fall anhydrous got applied. But if you don't do fall N, or you don't have fall manure and you're going to put N on in the spring, I mean, urea is still a good and one of our most dominant sources. on some of these fields that are more poorly drained, if you want to take the time and you have the option with the right retailer and you can put in hydroson, it is likely to be more consistent, and especially in fields that have poor drainage in south central Minnesota or are just plain wetter. In southeast, we see probably mostly urea. Split application might be superior, but it's not going to be year after year after year. We see an advantage for split application in southeast Minnesota about 20% of the time on medium and fine textured soils. But recognize that there are some fields all around the state that have portions of the field that have coarse textured soils. So if you have managed some of those fields that have either shallow depth to bedrock or coarse textured soils in them, try to manage those areas separately and use the recommendations and guidelines and application techniques for coarse textured soils if some of the fields have coarse textured soils.
Last question about rate of nitrogen. What do we have for tools out there, and what kind of credit should we give in a corn soybean rotation back for those soybeans? Any, just sky summary numbers here.
Yeah, so the corn N rate calculator, which you can find on the web, it has a separate calculation or table for both corn after corn and corn after soybeans. So it takes that soybean credit into place and gives you that credit based on having its own database or own table. So use that. Our recommendation for corn after soybeans generally is in that 135 to 155 pounds of N per acre. Nitrogen is the price ratio is a little bit off now. We got nitrogen at 60 to 65 cents per pound, and corn's only about 4.25 to 4.50. So that makes that suggestion maybe a little bit on the lower side of that rate that rate range. And then for corn after corn, our MRTN is around 175, and our recommended range is usually 165 to 190. And I would be on the high side on the more poorly drained soils, and in the medium or lower end of that range for the well-drained soils, and as you move west into the western part of the state.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. That's excellent information. We do appreciate you stopping by. Hope you have a chance also to see us on the trade show. Good exhibits. Yes, a little advertisement here. A couple of things coming up here at the University of Minnesota, the Nutrient Management Conference and a Nitrogen Management Conference. Can you summarize some of those events?
Yeah, so the 18th Annual Nutrient Management Conference is going to be held here in Mankato at this facility, or one of the facilities here connected to the convention center, on February 3rd, and registration fee is $20. That's for the virtual or in person. Got a bunch of sponsors that support that. The program starts at 8 and runs till about 3:30, 3:40. And we've got specialists not only from the state of Minnesota, but a few members from across the country and other people from industry that help put that program on. And then up in St. Cloud on February 17th, we have the Nitrogen Management Conference, and very similar. It's an all-day program, and registration fee is the same. And both of those conferences are supported by several sponsors: AFREC, the Department of Ag, Minnesota Ag Fertilizer Research and Education Council, Clean Water, Land and Legacy. And one thing I would like to mention too is that the Soybean Association and the Minnesota Corn Association have not only been sponsors of these programs, but also the last few years have been sponsors of our winter crops day at the Southern Research and Outreach Center. And that's helped, I think, with attendance a lot, and we've been able to reduce the fee or eliminate the fee for farmers at those conferences.
So again, it's either in person or online, good opportunities. And so finally, what again, the dates, which one's coming first?
February 3rd here in Mankato, that's the Nutrient Management Conference, and February 17th in St. Cloud at the Holiday Inn downtown, and that's the Nitrogen Management Conference.
Okay, very good. And I think you'll be attending both and being part of it. Thanks, Jeff. We appreciate that. Good opportunity to learn a little bit more about that. I think we have a representative here next.
We're gonna jump this way, Dave. So
all right, you go. Oh yes, you have a guest back in the table there with you.
spotlight myself and the table over here. Yeah, there we go. We're coming back over this direction. So, so we're here again at the annual kind of event here, the Minnesota Ag Expo for corn and soybean. Unfortunately, right now the corn delegates are having one of their business meetings and doing some voting and some of that stuff. So we can't get those folks, but happen to have a colleague and coworker here on my left, Brad Carlson, and he is actually working on one of the most important, or one of the major priority, I guess, for corn growers when it comes to production is the issues around nitrogen fertilizer, because you know corn is a big user of nitrogen. Jeff was just mentioning some things, but we're going to let Brad talk a little bit more about the programs that he's been developing to deal with some of those nitrogen issues.
Thanks, Ryan. We've been working with the Nitrogen Smart program, which was a major initiative from the corn growers for over a decade now. Corn has identified the water quality concerns to the general public, of course, are something that we need to, as an industry, also be concerned about. And we need to be proactive, and we need to be embracing the issue to work for solutions, things that work for agriculture instead of waiting for regulation to come around. And so the program that we devised many years ago really focuses on just the real basics of nitrogen, how it behaves in the environment, what kind of factors affect its availability, mineralization out of organic matter in the soil, and then, of course, the loss to water, which is the thing we're trying to avoid. Kind of poignant right now, Minnesota is just going final here in the next few weeks with our revised nutrient reduction strategy. The original one came out in 2014. We're really not seeing a lot of changes for the majority of the state. However, the Red River Valley is going to see some major changes. We're going from a proposed 13% reduction in nitrogen that's crossing the Canadian border to 53%. So going to really be some differences in the pressure put on in that part of the state.
Yeah. So Brad, give us a little bit of a kind of a primer or kind of a review of what that nutrient reduction strategy is. Why is it there? What's it about?
It was an initiative kind of required by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to deal with hypoxia in the Gulf. Hypoxia is some people call it the dead zone, but it's really more dynamic than that. It's actually an area of high life and high productivity part of the year when the water flow is high through the river because of the nutrient rich nature of fresh water. What happens when the water shuts down in the summer? Water flow goes down in the river, and then the amount of the supply of the nutrient cuts off in the Gulf, and then the kind of the reduction in that ends up causing some reduction in the life. Things die as they decompose. They rob the water of oxygen. It's a natural condition. It's been going on forever. Some people talk about eliminating it. It can't be eliminated. But the goal is to get it back to what they think is the natural state, the natural size. And so to do that, the EPA established a goal of reducing the amount of nitrogen being deposited in the Gulf of 45% from the Mississippi River. And so the states were required to come up with a plan on how to do that. Now, Minnesota, being on the Continental Divide, we've actually got three major watersheds here. Our nutrient reduction strategy not only includes the plans to deal with the Gulf, but also the Red River going into Lake Winnipeg, ultimately to the Arctic Ocean, and then also Lake Superior. And so we've kind of developed some strategies. There's really three parts. It's nitrogen fertilizer management, it's edge of field practices, which look at treating water before it gets discharged into surface water, something we talked about on last week's webinar. And then the other part is living cover, dealing with cover crops and perennial crops and stuff like that. So it kind of comes up with a laundry list of practices, suggested improvements that can happen from these practices. And ultimately in Minnesota, there are watershed plans which identify locally kind of what'll work and what won't work. There's funding that's being targeted into what we call Huck 8 watersheds. HUC stands for hydrologic unit code. 8 means an 8-digit number. That's not important to anybody, but it's like the yellow medicine or the blue earth or the LeSueur or the Cannon. Right. And so that size of a river, and we've kind of gone through one cycle with those plans. In a lot of cases, a lot of that money ended up going to kind of lingering projects, things that have just been kind of out there that they haven't been able to get accomplished and paid for over the years. A lot of that stuff's been taken care of. So we're probably entering an era now where they're going to be a lot more proactive on the local level, a lot more aggressive with going out and kind of engaging farmers to start doing practices and putting practices in place. And so farmers, I think it's important right now to understand what these things are and how they work, because you're probably going to be approached about doing them and you need to decide, will they work for me? How do they work? And do they make sense economically?
So, Brad, one of the things you've been working on, or at least one of the initial things, I guess, was some of the work with support from the corn growers was to kind of get growers nitrogen smart. And I don't remember when that first started. You started with a kind of an in-person program. It was kind of you called it pseudo regulatory. It's not really a regulatory program.
It was kind of a certification program. The way it was envisioned initially, there was some talk at the time that there might be a requirement for licensing nitrogen application like there is for pesticides. That never came to be. So we really kind of transitioned off of that certification aspect and really have just been focusing on the education parts.
Okay. So,
yeah.
But that first step was this basic course, which was really just a review of all the fundamentals as far as how nitrogen cycles in the environment.
Right.
And how to maximize production, as well as some of the kind of, the nutrient reduction strategy, some of the kind of political or governmental rules around water and its governance or whatever. So it's kind of a neat program. I don't know if you're doing them in person anymore, but there is a really couple of great resources online that folks can check out.
Right. So our webpage for the whole program in an overarching standpoint is we call it a Z link. So it's Z, the letter z.umn.edu and then /nitrogen smart, all one word. And you can find all of our offerings there. So in addition to that original fundamentals program, Ryan, we've developed 6 other curriculums that we call advanced nitrogen smart that focus the one called a deep dive into the 4 R's kind of takes that fundamentals and then just moves it on for another 3 hours of really in-depth discussion. The other ones focus on manure, climate, some of the conservation stuff and so forth. So those are available as online courses. You can take that anytime. So the fundamentals course, we still offer that when we get requested. There probably will be a couple of them this winter. But the advanced courses we still offer in a 2-day long, what we call nitrogen college. Don't exactly have the details lined up yet. We're really close, but I hate to throw it out there.
You can go to that webpage.
It'll be all on that webpage. We're kind of focusing on the probably the second week of February in the St. Cloud area and the last week of February in the Mankato area. That's what we're thinking. And then we've customized some of our other offerings regionally. So this year we're going to be doing a couple of events in Northwest Minnesota. As I mentioned, there's really some aggressive new goals for the Northwest. So we're going to just call this one N in the NW. And that will be on January 30th in the afternoon in Roseau following pesticide safety education. And February 13th, we're going to be in Thief River Falls in the morning prior to pesticide safety education. We know that farmers in the Northwest get asked to travel long distances. And so we're trying to team up with other programs and events you're already going to, not make you drive another 2 hours to something special. So we're going to do those events. And then we're going to be doing dealing with some of the unique issues relative to Southeast Minnesota and some of the stuff going on there. That's going to be probably at the end of February and early March.
Okay, excellent. And, maybe mention too, for folks really interested in nutrient management and nitrogen topics, you guys have a pretty interesting, innovative podcast. If you're into podcasts,
Right.
it's a great source for information.
Right. So the nutrient management group that we have in Minnesota, we've actually been producing a podcast for many years. And so those come out regularly on a real wide variety of topics. However, starting about 2 years ago, we also transitioned the Nitrogen Smart curricula to a very specific podcast we call Advancing Nitrogen Smart. Just dealing with topics, portions of the stuff we cover. What's fascinating is this is a little bit of inside pool for us as educators. We'll look at a PowerPoint and say it's about 1 slide per minute. So if you take 10 slides, it should take you about 10 minutes to deliver that. We're taking about 10 slides for these podcasts, and it's taking us about 40 minutes to talk about those things. So we are really getting in depth with a lot of the nuance on this stuff. And so if that interests you, yeah, check out, again, our webpage is z.umn.edu/nitrogen smart. And we've got, you can find all those podcasts. And then we've also been doing some of the little short clip videos. I don't think we're on TikTok, but we put them out on Facebook and other places. They're available on the web and so forth too. So we call those nitrogen nuggets.
So Brad, I might fall over and die if I ever see you on TikTok doing some kind of interpretive TikTok.
Oh, there will be no dancing. There will be no dancing. Yeah. This is
So anyways, looking forward. I know you got a couple in the works, interesting topics. One with the variable rate and another one on the biological side of nitrogen and nitrogen
Right.
fixation. That
right.
kind of thing.
Those are a couple of shorter ones that only take about an hour. The variable rate thing has never really developed the way we thought it would. So we thought, well, let's just talk for an hour, kind of what we know. We do have a lot of take-home lessons on that topic. Similarly, biologicals, an area there's been a ton of interest in, a ton of products out there, but not a ton of results. So Dan does have a session on that one that he's been doing that kind of goes through what our research has been to this point. The thing about biologicals we keep saying is some of the science there really is sound. It's just that the performance hasn't been there. So we really think eventually these products will probably work. So it's important to kind of keep up on that.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Brad. And we're going to switch the camera back over to Dave. We've acquired a couple more guests here to interview here on the trade show floor. So I'm going to mute and turn it back to Dave there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. Appreciate the opportunity. We're here with a very special guest, Corey Hansen. Corey is from the Norman area, and Corey has a very important job here with Minnesota soybean growers, chairing a committee. You want to tell the folks a little bit about what that committee is and the functions of the committee?
Yeah, I happen to chair the research and part of a research team of the Research and Promotion Council. The other day we looked at 33 proposals for about $1.8 million worth, and going to try to whittle that down into about $1 million or a little bit less budget. And it's a difficult job.
Yeah, a lot of those proposals come from a lot of different sources. I mean, obviously, some of them are from obviously the University of Minnesota, but there are others from outside the University of Minnesota, are there not, in terms of that? So it's spread around the state in terms of opportunities.
Yes, it is. It's spread around the state. We have University of Minnesota gets a portion of it. We wholeheartedly support the breeding program, a fertilizer program, and weed sciences. We support them. We also support, with, like you say, through several smaller individual type programs. We also got some proposals this year from out of state where Minnesota is partnering with South Dakota State. Minnesota is partnering with North Dakota State. Minnesota is partnering with Wisconsin. So it's very interesting to see those partnerships. And there's a proposal that's partnering Minnesota corn and Minnesota soybean for the first time that I can remember. But yeah, I've been on the team now for 18 years. So it's kind of becoming old hat, but it's, as a chairman, the first year, it's a lot or more responsibility and understanding of what's going on.
You mentioned that you have quite a few applications. How do you prioritize those, or what do you do as a committee? What are some of the methods that you set the bar, so to speak? Are you looking for certain things depending upon the year, the economics, but what drives the committee in terms of saying, well, this is the kind of area or the emphasis that we want to have at this point in time, but what's that process like?
Well, first of all, it starts at the farm. Farmers have problems or complaints. I go to county meetings, not only my only county meeting, but several of them. And I have the Northwest region or north half of the state. Or third of the state, I should say. So I try to make as many of those county meetings and ask what's problems out there. Sergio, our research director, from Minnesota Soybean, talks several times on the phone. Sometimes more than once a week. We talk about things that's happening out there, problems, whether it could be certain weed resistance problems, it could be white mold problems, red crown rot is first coming into our state. We're addressing that very, very attentively. So things like that, problems that are right now at the state, we're looking at, but it all starts from a farmer's problems. And if he has a problem or if he has a complaint, he has something wrong at why he's not growing soybeans, and we can go out there and document it. We can go look at it. We try to push our research towards that, because that's what the real problems today is, not what it's, and then we also have kind of in the back of our mind, we have a three-way function at Minnesota Soybean and the research team, is that we'd like to spend, we're looking at what's today's problem, what's the next 5 years problem, and what's the next 10 years problem. So we have some projects that are looking out, what do we think is going to happen? Sometimes we're looking at what's going to happen now in 5 years. Sometimes it's right away.
So tell us just a little bit about the funding. We talked to one of your committee members, Bob, here a little bit earlier, but it's check off dollars in terms of that. Certainly you have to work with that. It's not necessarily unlimited, from year to year. So how does that vary back and forth?
No, it's not unlimited. I don't know the exact percentage research team gets of the whole check off budget, but our budget has been in high, as I can remember, some over 2 million. When the price of beans are good, we have lots of bushels, everything going good. Right now, we're kind of in we're pulling back. We had about $1 million this year to give away, where, it gets to be very tough to try to prioritize projects and prioritize things and what is needed, what is something that we'd like to see, and what is something, hey, that's a really cool idea, but we just don't have the funding this year, maybe next year projects.
So, commodity prices dictate part of this as well, in terms of that and the volume, don't they?
Yes, commodity prices, we get 0.5% on the beans gets taken onto the checkoff, and then basically USB, or our national organization, gets half of that, and Minnesota Soybean gets the other. Research and Promotion Council gets the other half of that. And amongst that, we've got to divvy it out between new uses. We have a communications team. We have like our clean and power fuels, like our biodiesel. Trying to remember what else we have going. High impact. So, we have several different areas. Research probably taking a good share of, probably one of the larger ones, but we're still not a third of the whole budget.
Certainly, besides production practices that you're funding and so forth, but there's new product development. Anything successes here lately in terms of chemistry, polymers, soy foam, etc.?
Well, yeah, a couple things. First of all, I'm really happy with our breeding project this year. I think is releasing 3 new lines through the University of Minnesota, Aaron Lorenz, and cooperation with Minnesota Soybean. So we're getting a little bit of royalties back on that, which is always nice, because it always helps you look into the future. And we're helped. We always are proud to support the breeding program. New uses, yeah, we just got done 2025 with 300 5-gallon pails of soy foam. It's a great product. It's just come out. We did it, released it last year. It's come out through a company down in Georgia. But basically it's foam. You use it as standard operating firefighting foam. You can put it in, but it's biodegradable. It's no PFAS, which causes cancer causing agents. So, not only about when the firefighters are using it, They don't have to worry about cancer. If they happen to get squirted in a fire, that it's blast back on them. Yes, they have protective clothing, but if it happens to run down or something like that, or to get it on themselves, it's not going to hurt them. And I think one of the greater part of it is that the environmental friendliness is that we don't have to go excavate dirt up from that because of the foam they're using. They might have to do it because of something else, but they're not taking it up because of the foam we're getting them to smother the fire so they can use it with less water. It's like a wetting agent.
Okay. Very good. Any last things, Corey? Anything about, we were just talking about farming in your area and weeds here a little bit earlier. Tell us a little about your operation and what it looks like here for 2026.
Well, our farm is in north central Norman County, which is northwest corner of Minnesota. It doesn't look good. Put cash flows together, it's not happening. But you're gonna have to put it together. My theory is that basically I still am going to raise some wheat. I'm still going to raise some corn. I'm still going to raise some beans. We also got livestock cattle, and we only got 30 of them. We're down from about 90 just because I'm alone. I'm 61. My dad's 92 and he, can't hardly help no more. So, I mean, I can't take care of 92 cows, 90 cows by myself, calving and summertime and haymaking besides keep the crops going. So we're dropped down to about 30 there. So it's looking good. It's, that looks like it's a great profit. Once again, they've been paid for many years. I mean, Dad started back in the 50s with cattle.
Yeah, certainly diversification is going to be key as we go forward here in the cattle market. I know has been good, depending upon obviously which side you're on an opportunity with that. But you're more, like you say, corn, soybeans, wheat, not necessarily in sugar beets, but you don't have to go too far from you to get into those areas as well.
No, neighbors got sugar beets. We just never got wound up into them and invested in it. Not because it wasn't bad. It's basically because when we have cattle, we're already busy throughout the summer. The times of spraying doesn't work out. The lifting times don't work out. And there's part of me that does like my nights versus working all night long lifting sugar beets. And I'm not saying anything bad about it. I'm just saying is that I kind of enjoy my sleep a little more than maybe somebody else does, and my rest at least for 6 hours at night.
Well, we're really lucky that the fact that you do have enough time yet, and you're serving on the Minnesota Soybean Association and the Growers Group and the research committee. That's very helpful. I mean, in terms of that. So it's you give of your time to it helps the whole industry here in the state of Minnesota in terms of that. So thank you very much, Corey. We appreciate your stopping by and visiting here, and hopefully we're getting a few more folks going through here at the trade show. And if you haven't, opportunity, stop by today and learn more about it.
Yes, please do. Great trade show here yesterday. Please stop by today. We're raffling off at our Minnesota soybean booth a fish house, but they also have a game where if you can get the wiffle ball to hit certain areas in the goal with a plastic hockey stick, you get a prize. So it's a lot of fun too, and I always enjoy because I enjoy coming back every year and meeting the people I've seen before and things like that. So
all right, well, thank you very much, Corey. Appreciate that. Well, we're going to move on here to our next.
We're going to jump over here, Dave.
All right, sounds good.
Over here, and we actually have a question that came up before our next guest comes on. We're going to just address this question that came in, and it has to do with if we were to reduce the nitrogen load by 45%, is there any proof they'd restore the hypoxic zone?
Well,
Eliminate
yeah. So like I mentioned, Ryan, you can't eliminate the hypoxic zone. The goal is to just shrink it back to what was the natural size. I think it's important to recognize that the Gulf Hypoxia Action Plan that was put out by the EPA is almost like a Supreme Court decision. There's a majority opinion and there's a dissenting opinion. And so if you really want, you can look that up and you can read the dissenting opinion. The majority opinion was 45%. And it's way too complicated of a topic to get into briefly here. I guess what I would say is there's been theorized that maybe it doesn't need that much. Some people think it needs higher than that. It's also been theorized that maybe a lot of the nitrogen in the high parts of the watershed in the upper Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, isn't actually reaching the Gulf. I don't think we've decided. I mean, nitrate doesn't identify itself in the river as far as where it came from. The one thing I will say though is that the hypoxic zone is tracked annually, as well as we measure the amount of nitrogen in the river, regularly. And so, from that standpoint, as the years go by, we'll kind of know, where we're falling in place. If it didn't need that much, well, we'll meet the goal much sooner, and we'll probably change priorities. If we need more than that, the goal is to try and reach it by 2040. I guess it'll probably have to be revisited at that time.
All right. Well, thanks, Brad, for that answer. And again, hook up with the Nitrogen Smart if you want more discussion on that whole topic. That said, we are going to move back to the trade floor with Dave. He's out there. He's got another guest wrangled, I can see. And so we're going to have a discussion back from that direction.
Wish we could. Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. We appreciate that.
Jim.
We got Jim coming up here from Roosevelt Lake of the Woods. And Jim, I think maybe you want to just step over here just a little bit farther there. And now we're on a camera range here with the Minnesota Soybean Growers. Why don't you tell us, Jim, a little bit about the committee that you're on Minnesota Soybean. Also, you have some national responsibilities. Take your time, get you off the farm, get you involved. Maybe talk about first about the Minnesota, then let's talk about some of the national aspects too.
Well, I don't know what Minnesota's like because I'm never in Minnesota hardly at all. But no, I'm on the Research and Promotion Council, and we not on the research side, but I'm on the soybean, and I'm one of the people that are on that committee. And then we make decisions of what would benefit the farmers in the future, now and in the future. And it's I've been on the research side since back in the canola days, which was in the 80s. We did packets about 3 inches high, and we'd go through that, and we had many meetings on different things, as far as what to go for. Now it's soybean. We're trying new uses and weed resistance, and yeah, it's from chemicals. So
well, you have a unique aspect. Let's talk about growing soybeans in probably for some of our listeners farther north. Yeah, what are the challenges soybean production as we get to that Red River Valley and then far in northern Minnesota? What are some things that come to mind that you've seen and talked to growers and so forth that they have in terms of growing sustainably in their soybean production?
I also sell seed, and I've been in the seed business since I started farming, which was in, I don't remember when, about the 80s or 70s. I guess I've been 70 quite a while anyways. But anyways, I took and sold the first soybeans that I know of in Roosevelt County in the late 70s, early 80s. And the problem was then there was no place to take them. So I had to go all the way to Fergus Falls, which is 100, almost 200 miles away. And it were about 30 bushel an acre, which he used just he swatted them. Nobody had bean equipment back then. So he probably lost 5 bushel an acre on the ground. And it was impressive. So I don't remember what year it was. I've been on 2000, probably in the 90s. Soybeans finally took hold. So back then I had test plots. I did it with seed companies. I says, you give me 10 bags of seed and I'll seed test plots for you. So that went there, and then phomopsis and a bunch of different white mold and issues with different varieties. So that was really interesting. So I was really like, oh, we got to keep doing this research to find different varieties and stuff. And the cold weather, now people, because of the weather change, are raising all the way up to 03s. I think they're nuts, but whatever. It's up to them. But yeah, last year, a friend of mine put some in. He had ryegrass. He put him in first part of June. And he says, that was my best running beans. And it was an 03 he put in. And he took them off. It was like 55 bushel an acre average on that piece of ground, which is unnormal for...
This is up in Lake in the Woods County or Roosevelt?
Roosevelt County, yeah. Roosevelt County, yeah. So it was impressive. So it's the cold, the rain, too much water. This fall, he tried to take them beans off. He left because we were wet in a small area. So the biggest challenge is not enough tile drainage up there. So it's
a challenge. Let's talk a little bit about some of the different committees that you're on in that perspective.
Well, nationally, I'm on the conservation committee. I've been on that because I've been on the state NRCS technical advisory committee since 2000, I believe it is. I got appointed by our state, our executive director. Then he asked me to step up the ladder and come to that. So there was issues because I'm from northern Minnesota, and the first meetings were held in St. Paul or south of St. Paul. Finally, they moved it way north to St. Cloud.
Yeah, that's north for some people, definitely.
Yes, it is. And it was funny. This gal drove 2 hours, and she's complaining about it. I says, young lady, I really feel bad for you. I only drove 4.5. I didn't think it was too bad at all.
Well, that's certainly
national. It's like I said, I'm on the conservation committee. So it's cover crops and stuff like that. I'm always a promoter of stuff like minimum till. I went on my farm years back, minimum till. I farmed about 3,000 acres back then. I saved about 20,000 gallons of fuel. And back then it wasn't so bad for price. And now we're paying big dollars for farm fuel. So
certainly that's going to be the challenge going forward, is controlling those production costs and input costs, because those commodity prices, they can go up, but they can certainly go down, can't they?
Yes, and it was funny when we first started farming. It wasn't. I'm just using this as a time frame, and I don't give anybody credit for it. But it was when Bush, or I believe it was Obama, was just getting done. It's the first year I actually made all my payments on time. I also had a good banker. So then the biggest reason was because my land payments are finally getting done. So then we had extra money, because we started out with nothing. I mean, I farmed with my brother, and I says, life is too short to farm with you. So I went on my own. So yeah, it was challenging back then.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Any other comments? Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here and turn it back to Ryan. But thank you for joining down here, and it's a great show. And so we encourage people, if they still have an opportunity, to stop by yet today.
Thank you. Just last week, I got appointed to the state FSA committee. I kind of knew about it last year, but it took a whole year to get that finalized. So,
well, in addition to farming the farm, it sounds like you're still going to be farming the road, Jim. So
sure, yeah,
that's for sure. Well, thanks again, Jim. We appreciate that. Ryan, you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, I'm going to come back here. We're going to wrap things up for today. So just want to thank everyone for tuning in again today to this session of the Strategic Farming Let's Talk Crops episode. Again, not going to offer CEUs for this session because of kind of the wide-ranging topics we're going to cover. And so that's where we're at today. Do want to encourage you, though, if you don't get the opportunity to get down here this year to the Minnesota Ag Expo annually, it is in this time period every January. 2-day show. It's a good time. A lot of chance to take in some of the educational topics and speakers as they have. They have some social activities as well as a nice trade show with a lot of interaction for folks. So that's a really good opportunity, as well as both of the consuls have their a number of their projects that they're highlighting, the things that their checkoff money actually funds, and the work that gets done here at the university and with extension. And so it kind of highlights that, gets you an opportunity to see what those dollars are paying for and what some of the results are. So great opportunity, folks. And I want to say thanks again to our sponsors, Minnesota Corn Research Promotion Council, as well as Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council. Thanks for that. And with that, we are going to wrap up the show for today.